Where did you get this watch? The man in the black tuxedo looked at her wrist as if he had seen a ghost. Wedding music, toasts, and laughter thundered in the hall of the Grand Hotel Kempinski, Geneva. But he did not take his eyes off the small gold watch on her wrist. Mademoiselle, I will ask the question again. Where did you get this watch? Emma mechanically covered the watch with her hand. It had belonged to her grandfather. It was the only thing she had left from her family. This is my grandfather's watch. The man turned pale. He finished his champagne in one gulp. He set the glass on the table so that the crystal clinked. Mademoiselle Dupont, I just bid 3,800,000 francs for this watch at Christie's a year ago. The lot fell through because the watch has no provenance. So where did you get this watch? Good day, friends. Let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. Don't forget to subscribe and give the video a like. This story takes place in one of those quiet Swiss towns where life flows at a measured pace, and where no one suspects that a small workshop on the 5th floor could hold a secret worth more than an entire city block. This is the story of how one old watch changed the life of a young woman who thought she had nothing. Geneva in April is a city finally breathing out after winter. The heavy gray clouds that hung over Lake Geneva for 6 months are finally lifting. The Jet d'eau fountain is once again in full swing. At 140 meters high, it's visible from anywhere in the city. The alleys of the Bastion Park are filled with chess tables where elderly men play Italian games. Prices at the cafes on Rue de Rhône rise as the tourist season begins, but locals still drink their espresso at the counter. It's 3 times cheaper than sitting at a table. Emma Dupont lived in Geneva her entire 28-year life. Not in the wealthy part of town, on Rue des Carouges, in a small studio on the 5th floor with no elevator, a single window overlooking the courtyard, and that same old stone facade that in Geneva is considered character, but in reality means poor soundproofing and cracks in the windows. The rent was 1,650 francs a month, which was cheap by Geneva standards, because Emma had lived there for 7 years, and the landlord hadn't raised the rent. Emma was 28, of average height, 6 feet 7 inches, slender, with dark, shoulder-length hair that she almost always wore in a simple braid, and light gray eyes, so light that sometimes it seemed she had 2 pearls for eyes. Her face was delicate, aristocratic, with the regular features she inherited from her mother. This face bothered her, because when people first saw Emma, they assumed she was a model, an actress, the daughter of a diplomat. But in reality, she was a watchmaker, and not from a wealthy family. Quite the opposite. Emma worked in a small watchmaking workshop, the Horloger Morin, on Rue de la Rôtisserie, in the Old Town. The workshop occupied the 2nd floor of a 4-story building and employed 4 people. Mr. Henri Morin, the owner and head watchmaker, 67 years old. His wife, Sylvie, the bookkeeper and saleswoman, and 2 apprentices, Emma and an older man named Laurent, 47, who had entered the watchmaking business at 35 after an unsuccessful career in insurance. The Horloger Morin workshop didn't make its own watches. It specialized in restoration. It was a niche in the Swiss watchmaking world. Not Patek Philippe with their million-piece production, not Rolex with its assembly line, but restoration. Old watches, vintage, antique, pocket watches from the 19th century, wristwatches from the 30s, broken, stopped, lost from decades of dust and mishandling. People brought watches from all over Europe to Morin because he was one of the best in Switzerland. Not the most famous, but the best. Those who understood came to him. Emma worked for Morin for 8 years. She joined at 20 after a 2-year course at the School of Watchmaking in Biel, a small Swiss town that, along with Geneva, forms the 2 centers of Swiss watchmaking. The course was supposed to last 3 years, but Emma completed it in 2, with honors. Morin hired her immediately after graduation. He paid her 15 francs 70 an hour. Then, after 3 years, he raised it to 18.20. After 5 years, he raised it to 21.60. Now Emma earned about 2,900 francs a month, net. By Geneva standards, that was little. But Emma didn't complain. Because the main thing wasn't the money. The main thing was the work. Emma loved her job as few people do. Her workstation was by the window, an old wooden workbench where watchmakers had worked for 120 years. Morin had bought it in 1800 or something from the widow of a deceased watchmaker. On the workbench were a magnifying glass on a stand, miniature tools, tweezers thinner than a toothpick, tiny screwdrivers with blades 1/10 of a millimeter, trays for parts, special stands for disassembled mechanisms, and, occasionally, watches. Old, disassembled ones, with the dials removed, the mechanisms exposed, in need of restoration. Emma knew these mechanisms the way other women know their apartment by heart. She knew the sound of a properly adjusted balance wheel. She knew the smell of an old spring from the 1950s and a spring from the 1930s, different metals, different temperings. She knew what a properly lubricated axle should look like. It should shine, but not greasy, but with a special, subtle sheen. She knew the ticking of a properly assembled watch mechanism, a rhythm that cannot be described in words, but Emma recognized it from the first second. Emma's entry into watchmaking wasn't accidental. Her grandfather, Émile Dupont, was a watchmaker his entire life. Not in Switzerland, but in France, in the small town of Besançon, which had once been a European watchmaking center but lost its place after World War II. Grandfather Émile worked at the Lipp Watch Company in Besançon from 1948 when he was 18. He rose through the ranks, from apprentice to master watchmaker. He made watches for the French army, for the Eiffel Tower, where the famous clock stands, and for the Paris Metro. Emma didn't remember her grandfather alive. He died in 2003 when she was 6. But she remembered his hands, large, with long fingers, with small scars on the pads from tweezers and instruments. These hands would lay her on his lap and show her the ticking of a toy alarm clock. "Look, Emma," her grandfather would say, "every second is movement. Every movement is work. Every work is meaning." Emma remembered these words, and from then on, the watch became a part of her life. Emma's family was complicated. It was the main thing that defined her life. Her paternal grandmother, Suzanne Dupont, was the daughter of first-wave Russian immigrés, those who fled Russia after the revolution of 1918. Her parents, Suzanne's grandmother's parents, came to Paris from St. Petersburg in 1919, leaving everything they had behind. Emma's great-grandfather was Sergei Vorontsov, an engineer from St. Petersburg who graduated from the Institute of Railway Engineering. Her great-grandmother was Olga, the daughter of a doctor from Moscow. They met in Paris at the Émigré Church on Rue Daru and married in 1920. They had Suzanne in 1922. Suzanne grew up in France, speaking French like a Frenchwoman and Russian with a childish accent, which her mother sometimes corrected. In 1948, when she was 26, she married Émile Dupont, a young watchmaker from Besançon, where she had gone to work. They had a son, Jean-Paul Dupont, in 1950. He was Emma's father. Jean-Paul wasn't a watchmaker. He was a journalist, more precisely, a war correspondent. He graduated from the Sorbonne in 1975, worked for the newspaper Le Figaro, and traveled to conflict zones, the Middle East, Africa, Yugoslavia. In 1990, he married a Swiss woman, Béatrice Morel, who was a translator at the UN in Geneva. They had Emma in 1996. The family lived in Geneva, on Rue de Lausanne, in an apartment overlooking the lake. In 2003, Emma's father died in Chechnya during the Second Chechen War, a sniper. He was 53. Emma was 6. 2 months later, her grandfather, Émile, died in Besançon. Of a stroke, they said, unable to bear the loss of his son. A year later, her grandmother, Suzanne, died of cancer at 82. Emma's mother, Beatrice, held out for 5 years after her husband's death. She couldn't cope. She left for Montreal, Canada, to live with her sister. She took Emma with her, but they only lived in Montreal for 2 years. Beatrice remarried to a Canadian professor who didn't want to raise another man's child. At 11, Emma returned to her maternal grandparents in Geneva to live with her maternal grandparents. Her grandparents were simple people, not rich, not educated. Grandfather André worked as an electrician for the Swiss railways for 40 years. Grandmother Jacqueline was a cashier at a Migros supermarket. Emma grew up with them in a small 3-room apartment on Rue de Coulouverrière in the Charenton district. They were her real parents. They raised her, sent her to school, and at 18 sent her to Biel to learn watchmaking. Grandfather André died in 2018. Emma was 22. Grandmother Jacqueline died in 2021. From then on, Emma was left alone. She and her mother in Montreal barely spoke. Jean-Paul was dead. Grandfather Émile was dead. Grandmother Suzanne was dead. Emma had no close relatives left in Europe. Only old letters, photographs, and one thing that Grandfather Émile gave to her father a week before his death, and which her father left to Emma before his trip to Chechnya in 2003. Watch. A small gold lady's wristwatch with a thin leather strap. The dial features white enamel, thin Roman numerals, and 2 hands. The caseback is engraved, Mon ange, a toujours. Oh. There are no visible inscriptions or logos on the front. Simple, elegant, clearly old. Emma, with her watchmaking background, dated it to the early 20th century. When her father gave Emma this watch, she was 6. Those were the last words she heard from him. "Emma," he said, leaning toward her in the hallway of their apartment in Geneva. "This is a very important thing. This is great-grandmother Olga's watch. Take care of it. Someday, when you grow up, I'll tell you its story. For now, keep it. It's yours." 4 months later, her father died. Emma never learned the story. She kept this watch in a small shoebox in the closet, wrapped in an old silk scarf that smelled of lavender. She wound it once a year, on her birthday, to keep it from stopping completely. The watch kept time precisely, within 2 seconds a day, which was incredible for a century-old mechanism. Emma never wore them in public. Never. They were sacred, not for everyday life. And then there was a wedding. The wedding of her best friend, Solange Bayet. Solange was Emma's only truly close friend. They met at school in Geneva at 11, when Emma had just returned from Canada and knew no one. Solange, red-haired, boisterous, the daughter of a bookshop owner on the Grand Rue, welcomed her. They were friends for 17 years. Solange lived in Geneva, working as a librarian at the University of Geneva. And in April of 2024, she married Belgian lawyer Thomas Mercier, whom she had met a year earlier. The wedding was serious. Not a small, friendly affair, but a grand affair, with 120 guests at the Grand Hotel Kempinski, Geneva, a 5-star hotel on the shores of Lake Geneva, right next to the Jet d'Eau. Solange was her parents' only daughter, and her father was prepared to spend half his life's savings on the wedding. A Vera Wang dress, bought at a discount through a friend, a 200,000 franc banquet, flowers from Holland. It was truly grand. Emma was the chief bridesmaid, and she needed to look it. Not in her usual studio clothes, jeans and a sweater, but for real. A month before the wedding, Emma went to the Gong store on Rue du Rhône, where she could find good quality dresses at reasonable prices. She bought a dark blue silk midi dress, knee-length, simple and elegant. 740 francs, more than a quarter of her monthly salary. But Solange was worth it. To go with the dress, she paired it with simple, low-heeled black shoes, another 220 francs. For her hair, she was planning to go to the hairdresser the morning of the wedding. For her makeup, she called on her school friend Marivon, who worked as a makeup artist. And jewelry. Emma stood in front of her open closet a week before the wedding, thinking. She didn't have a single piece of decent jewelry. Simple silver earrings, yes. A thin chain with a small cross, yes. That's all. But she needed something special. Something that would match the silky blue dress and the setting. A 5-star hotel on the banks of the Lake Geneva. And then she remembered her great-grandmother's watch. Emma took out a shoebox, opened it, unfolded a silk scarf, and, for the first time in 22 years, she looked at the watch as jewelry. Not as a relic, not as a memento, but as a beautiful thing that could complement an outfit. They were perfect. A thin gold case, clear white enamel, a thin leather strap that Emma had recently replaced with a new one because the old one had dried out. The watch kept running. It looked modern because the simple, elegant design of the early 20th century always looks modern. Emma put them on her wrist. She looked in the mirror. They were hers. They went with her dress, with her hands, with her. "It's for one evening," she said out loud, as if talking to a great-grandmother she'd never met. "Just for the wedding, then back in the box." April 21st, Saturday. Emma spent the morning at Marivon's, getting her makeup and hair done. By 1 o'clock, she was at Solange's apartment on Rue de Carouge to help her friend dress her in her wedding dress. They laughed, took photos, and cried, like all brides and their bridesmaids. By 3 o'clock, they were off to the Kempinski Hotel. The ceremony was short and civil, in a small hall on the 2nd floor. Solange and Tom said their I do's. The champagne was Dom Pérignon, not the most expensive, but not the cheapest either. Congratulations. Photos. Emma, as bridesmaid, held the bouquet, helped with the train, and smiled for the cameras. By 5 o'clock, they had moved to the large banquet hall. The guests numbered 120 in tuxedos and evening gowns. Some were from the groom's side, Belgians, lawyers from Brussels who spoke French with a distinctive Belgian accent. Others were from Solange's side, Genevese librarians, childhood friends, and relatives of the Bayettes. And a few unexpected guests. It turned out that Tom had an uncle on his mother's side, a prominent Belgian businessman named Van Dam. This uncle had invited 2 business partners who were in Geneva on business. One of them was an elderly Swiss named Georges Delacroix. The other was a tall man in the tuxedo, about 60 years old, with graying hair and that special look that comes from people accustomed to appraising things and people. He introduced himself as Dmitry Sokolov, a Russian collector from Moscow. Emma didn't encounter these guests for the first 2 hours. They sat in another part of the room, and she sat at the newlyweds' table. Toasts were made. Dinner was served. Tender duck in orange sauce, pâté, and asparagus. The orchestra began to play, a small classical trio. Solange and Tom opened the dance floor. Gradually, the guests began to mingle, as always happens at weddings. Around 9 o'clock in the evening, Emma went out onto the side terrace of the banquet hall to get some air. The hall was hot and noisy. There was no one on the terrace, just her with a glass of champagne, overlooking Lake Geneva at night with the illuminated jet d'eau fountain. A minute later, a man in a tuxedo came out onto the terrace, tall, gray-haired, holding a glass of whiskey. "Excuse me," he said in slightly accented French. "I wanted some fresh air, too." "Of course, come in." They stood in silence for a minute. Then he turned to her. "Are you the bridesmaid?" "Best friend." "Solange is a charming girl. I didn't know her until today. I'm here as a guest from Tom, or rather, from his uncle."
"Georges Delacroix?"
"No, I'm with another guest, Dmitry Sokolov, from Moscow."
"Emma Dupont."
They shook hands, and at that moment, Dmitry saw her watch. He froze. Not right away. He glanced first, the way men usually glance at their companion's watch. Then he glanced again. Then he stared. Emma noticed.
"Mademoiselle Dupont, where did you get this watch?"
"This is my great-grandmother's watch."
"Can I see it?"
Emma hesitated, but something in his voice, serious, not pushy, made her extend her hand. Dmitry took her wrist, carefully, professionally, bent down, and peered at his watch. He pulled a small magnifying glass from his tuxedo's inside pocket. Emma was surprised that a man would carry a magnifying glass at a wedding, but then she thought, a collector. A habit, perhaps. Dmitry looked at his watch for a long time. He turned her wrist over and looked at the back. And he turned pale. Really. The blood drained from his face. "Mademoiselle Dupont, I'll ask the question again. Where did you get this watch?"
"I already told you. From my great-grandmother, through my grandfather and father."
"What was your great-grandmother's name?"
"Olga Vorontsova, from St. Petersburg, emigrated to Paris in 1918. Died in the 1970s. I don't remember the exact year."
Dmitry released her wrist. He took a step back. He finished his whiskey in one gulp. He looked at her as if he were seeing her for the first time. "Mademoiselle Dupont, I just bid 3,800,000 francs for this watch at Christie's. a year ago. The auction fell through because the watch has no provenance. So where did you get this watch? Emma didn't understand. What lot? I didn't put anything up for sale. Not you, a French collector. He claimed this watch was an exact replica of the one that belonged to Empress Alexandra Feodorovna, the last Russian empress. A gift from her husband, Nicholas II, for their engagement anniversary in 1899. Made by Carl Fabergé, a special order. The case is gold, the dial is white enamel. Engraving on the caseback, Mon ange, a toujours, in. My angel, forever, in. Emma automatically turned the watch and looked at the engraving. Mon ange, a toujours, O. She'd always thought O was Olga's great-grandmother's initial. But what letter? She asked quietly. On the original, it's N, Nikolai. On yours, it's O. I looked with a magnifying glass, I'm sure of it. But these letters can be reversed, especially if someone's forging them. You can make an O out of an N by erasing one line. Do you mean to say that this is the Empress's watch? I don't know. It might be a copy, a very good copy. At the auction of a French collector, it was a copy, an expert examination showed. Although many experts disagreed with the examination. There was a big dispute. The lot was withdrawn from the auction. Since then, the original has been considered lost. Is my watch real? Dmitri looked at her for a long time. Mademoiselle Dupont, I need an expert opinion, a serious one, not a Swiss one. An expert opinion from experts in the royal jewels, usually done in London, at the firm Wartowski. If you agree, I'll organize it, and pay for it, because I want to know. Why do you need it? Because if it's genuine, it's one of the most significant pieces of jewelry in Russian history, missing for 125 years. And if it's genuine, it's yours, by inheritance. There can be no claims, I checked. The statute of limitations on Tsarist treasures expired long ago. This watch is yours, if it's genuine. Emma stood, champagne in hand, on the terrace of the Kempinski Hotel in Geneva at night, with the jet d'eau illuminated outside the window. And she listened as a man in a tuxedo told her that her watch might have belonged to Empress Alexandra Feodorovna, a gift from Nicholas II. It was incredible. I agree to the examination, she said. Okay, I'll contact you tomorrow. Do you have a business card? I have a phone number. They exchanged numbers. Dmitri, after a long glance at her watch, said goodbye and returned to the hall. Emma stood on the terrace for another 5 minutes. Then she, too, returned. To the wedding. To Solange. And she didn't speak to Dmitri Sokolov again that evening. The wedding ended at 2 in the morning. Solange and Tom left for their honeymoon, a safari in Kenya. Emma returned to her studio on Rue de Carouge. She took off her dress. She put her watch back in the shoebox, wrapped in a silk scarf, and, for the first time in 22 years, she couldn't sleep because of it. The next day, at 11 in the morning, Dmitri Sokolov called. Mademoiselle Dupont, good morning. Good morning. I've made arrangements with the Wartowski firm in London. They can accept the watch in 10 days, on Monday, May 4th. The flight is on me. I'll accompany you personally, if you agree. Emma thought, this was a huge event. A flight to London, an expert analysis, perhaps millions, perhaps nothing. Perhaps Dmitry Sokolov would turn out to be a fraudster who wanted to get hold of the watch under the pretext of an expert analysis. So she did the first thing she had to do. She called Morin, her boss, a master with 40 years of experience. She described the situation. Henri Morin listened attentively. Then she asked, "Emma, who is this person?" "Dmitry Sokolov, Russian collector." "I'll check it." Morin called back 2 hours later. "Emma, I called 3 auction houses in London. Sokolov is a renowned collector, specializing in royal jewels and Silver Age art. He has one of the largest private collections in the world, worth an estimated $150 million. He divides his time between Moscow, London, and Zurich. 75% of his collection is publicly catalogued. He's a serious, authoritative man, not a fraud. And what do you advise? Fly to London? A watch is a watch. It's been with your family for 125 years. It's fine. An examination is normal. But one condition. Which? The watch mustn't leave your hand for a second without you. No, leave it overnight and we'll take a look. The experts must do everything in your presence. And have Sokolov sign a written statement that he has no claim on the watch, regardless of the expert's findings. I'll prepare the document. Come to the workshop this afternoon." Emma arrived. Morin prepared a document, a short, one-page document, in French and English, guaranteeing that the watch would remain Emma Dupont's property, regardless of the expert's findings, and that Dmitry Sokolov would pay all expenses without complaint. Emma emailed the document to Dmitry. 40 minutes later, he signed it and sent it back. No objections. 10 days later, Emma flew to London. Dmitry was on her flight, but in a different class. He in first, she in economy. A car was waiting for him at Heathrow, and his driver, Sergei, was his driver. They drove together to the Wartowski office on Old Bond Street in Mayfair. It was a long-established jewelry company, founded in the 18th century, specializing in the appraisal of antique jewelry and objects. They were met by 2 experts, Charles Wartowski, son of the current generation's founder, and Adeline Hambley, an expert on late 19th century Russian jewelry. Adeline was an elderly woman, about 70, gray-haired, with glasses on a chain, and wearing a tweed suit. Emma immediately recognized her as a serious professional. The examination took 7 hours. 7 hours. Emma sat nearby, occasionally leaving only to go to the bathroom, and always returning. Adeline and Charles examined the watch under a microscope, a real, professional microscope, where every detail could be seen at a magnification of up to 120 times. They disassembled the case, but only delicately, carefully, with Emma's permission. They compared the metal with reference standards. They had Fabergé reference standards from their private library. They examined the engraving. Adeline spent 2 hours studying just the letter O/N under the microscope with 5 different light sources. By 5 o'clock in the evening, Adelina leaned back in her chair and took off her glasses. "Mademoiselle Dupont, may I ask you a few questions?" "Certainly." Your great-grandmother, Olga Vorontsova, immigrated to Paris in 1918 or 1919?
In the 19th.
Where from in Russia?
From Moscow. Her father was a doctor.
Father's name?
Viktor Vorontsov. Vorontsov from Moscow.
A doctor. Adelina paused. At the beginning of the century, there was a family in Moscow called the Vorontsovs, descendants of Count Mikhail Vorontsov, viceroy of the Caucasus. One of them, Viktor Sergeyevich Vorontsov, was court physician to the Grand Duchesses, the daughters of Nicholas II. I read about him. He had a daughter, Olga, born in 1897. Emma remained silent. Could this have been your great-grandmother? I don't know her exact date of birth, somewhere around the end of the 19th century. I can check. I have her passport at home. My grandmother kept it. Mademoiselle Dupont, if your great-grandmother was the daughter of a court physician, she could have had personal contact with Empress Alexandra Feodorovna. Alexandra Feodorovna was known for bestowing small but precious gifts on those close to her. If she gave something to her physician's family before emigrating, that's entirely possible. Is this plausible? That's very plausible. I found a record of such a gift in our archives. In 1917, a week before Nicholas's abdication, Alexandra Feodorovna wrote in her diary that she wanted to say goodbye to her loyal people. Among those she mentioned was Dr. Vorontsov. The diary doesn't specify what exactly she gave him, but there was a gift, and it could have been this watch. Charles joined the conversation. Emma, I'm ready to make a preliminary conclusion. The final one will be in 2 weeks, after a full examination of the metal and the movement in the lab. But first, the watch is authentic. It belonged to Empress Alexandra Feodorovna, made by Carl Fabergé in 1898 or 1899. A gift from Nicholas II for their engagement anniversary. The engraving is original. The letter N was changed to O by your great-grandfather or great-grandmother, probably in 1918 or 1919, to conceal the watch's origin from the Soviet authorities. This saved it. Emma sat, listened, didn't believe it. And the price? At auction now? Charles looked at his notes. Minimum £4,800,000 sterling. Maximum up to £8 million. Depends on the market and collector interest. This is one of the most valuable watches in the world right now. £8 million. Emma converted it into francs. It was about 9,800,000. 9,800,000. She earned $2,900 a month. Emma asked for water. Adelina brought it. Emma drank it slowly, unhurriedly. Then she looked at Dmitri Sokolov, who had been sitting in the corner of the room, silent throughout the entire examination. "Mr. Sokolov," she said, "do you want to buy this watch?" Dmitri didn't answer right away. He looked at her for a long time. "Mademoiselle Dupont, I want it. I really do. I've been looking for this watch for 20 years. It's the main gap in my collection of royal jewels. But I won't pressure you. It's your watch. If you want to put it up for auction, I'll attend and be one of the bidders. If you want to sell it to me directly, I'm prepared to pay £5 million without auction commission. That's a fair price, above the lower estimate. If you want to keep it, I respect that. And then I'll ask you for one favor." "Which one?" "Let me make a copy, a good museum-quality copy, so I can add it to my collection with the note, 'A copy of Alexandra Feodorovna's watch. The original is in the private ownership of Emma Dupont, Geneva.' That would be a worthy decision." Emma thought. For a long time. The watch on her wrist tickled. It had been ticking for 125 years. First with Empress Alexandra, then with her doctor, her great-grandfather Victor. Then with his wife Olga in Paris. Then with their daughter Suzanne. Then with her husband Emile, who kept it, unaware, or knowing, of its history. Then with her father Jean-Paul, who gave it to 6-year-old Emma without having time to tell her. Then with Emma herself, 22 years in a shoebox.
Mr. Sokolov, I'll think about it. Give me a week.
Certainly. They finished at the Wartovsky office by 8 o'clock that evening. Dmitri walked Emma to her hotel. She was staying at the Travelodge near Victoria Station, a modest hotel where a room cost £82 a night. Dmitri wanted to pay for a better hotel, but Emma refused. She lay awake for a long time in her room. She was thinking. 9,800,000 francs. It was more than she had earned in her entire life, and more than she would earn until retirement, given her current career. It was life-changing money. But sell the watch? The watch her father left her with those words. Emma, this is a very important thing. Take care of it. On the other hand, my father didn't know they were empresses. He probably knew, but didn't have time to tell them. Neither did their grandfather, Emile, nor their grandmother, Suzanne. And their great-grandmother, Olga, who received the watch from the Empress, changed the engraving to conceal it. No one in the family considered it an Empress's watch. It was a family heirloom. By morning, Emma had made her decision. Or rather, she realized she needed a few more days, maybe weeks. She wouldn't make this decision in haste. The next morning, she returned to Geneva. She arrived at lunchtime. She went straight to Morin's studio and told him everything. Henri Morin listened. He didn't interrupt. When Emma finished, he was silent for a long time. Emma, I've been in this business for 40 years. I've held many different watches in my hands. I've never held Alexandra Feodorovna's watch. This is an incredible thing, and it's yours.
What should I do?
Emma, I won't give you advice. It's your decision. I can only say one thing. Money is money. A watch is a memory. If you sell the watch, you'll have money. If you keep the watch, you'll have the memory of your great-grandmother who kept it for 100 years to pass it on to you. These are different things, and only you can decide which is more important.
If this were your watch, what would you do?
Morin thought.
Emma, I would sell it. Seriously?
Yes, because my wife Sylvie has wanted a house in Provence for the last 10 years. We don't have the money for a house in Provence. If I sold that watch, I'd buy her this house. And 40 years of our marriage would be worth more than any memory I'd lose. Memory remains in the mind, not in the watch. And a house in Provence is a specific place where Sylvie could breathe.
What if you didn't have a wife and didn't have the home you needed?
Then I would have thought differently. Then maybe I would have kept it. Because I have a craft in which I am not rich, but I do not starve either. And having the Empress's watch in my collection, that would be the highest achievement of my life. Emma sat in silence. Thank you, Henri. My pleasure. Emma left the studio. She walked through Geneva's Old Town, past St. Peter's Cathedral, across the Place du Bourg de Fort, down the Grande Rue to the embankment of Lake Geneva. She sat down on a bench by the jet d'eau fountain. She looked at the water. 1,000 liters per second, 140 meters high, one of the symbols of Geneva. and she understood. She won't sell this watch, and it will be her decision, not because of memory. Memory will remain in the head, as Moran said. Not because she was an empress, although that was a fact. Because this watch was the last thing her father gave her before he died. And it was on her wrist when she met Dmitry Sokolov at a friend's wedding, and he recognized her. It came into the world after 22 years in a shoebox, because Emma wore it to the wedding. It was a sign, not magical, but symbolic. The watch came into the world, and the world recognized it, and now it must stay with Emma, not to be worn every day, but to be. 2 days later, Emma called Dmitry Sokolov. "Mr. Sokolov, I have made a decision." "I'm listening." "I'm keeping the watch, but I agree to a copy for your collection, and I agree to one additional condition if you accept." "What condition?" "This watch is part of my family history and part of Russian history. I want it to be known to the public. I will allow you to publish the story in your collection catalog, in magazines, in any publications you deem necessary, with my name, with the story of my great-grandmother, with the story of Dr. Vorontsov, with her emigration, with how the watch came to me. This is more important to me than money." Dmitry remained silent. Mademoiselle Dupont. "Are you aware that this decision means you're becoming a public figure in the world of collectors?" "I know." "So what? There might be those who will lay claim to the watch. The Russian state, distant relatives, auctions, journalists." "I'm ready." "And you understand that I would pay you £5 million now, without publicity, and you could live completely quietly and comfortably for the rest of your life." "I understand, but I don't want to. I'm a watchmaker, Mr. Sokolov. I earn my living with my own hands. I don't need £5 million right away. I need to keep working so that I have hands that do what they know how to do. And watches are different. They're not a source of money. They're a memory." Dmitry remained silent for a while. "Mademoiselle Dupont, I agree to all your conditions. We'll make a copy. We'll publish the story. I'll have everything ready by the end of the year." In December 2024, Dmitry Sokolov opened a new section of his private collection in a special hall at the Center for Russian Culture in Zurich. The hall was small, with 20 exhibits. The centerpiece was a replica of Alexandra Feodorovna's watch. It was displayed under glass on a velvet stand. Next to it was a large photograph, Emma Dupont with the watch on her wrist, at her workbench in her workshop in Geneva, and a plaque detailing the history of the Dupont-Vorontsov family, their exile, immigration, preservation, and rediscovery. The hall's opening was attended by journalists, collectors, and cultural figures. Emma came from Geneva and gave several short interviews. In one of them, she uttered a phrase that later found its way into Swiss newspapers. "They told me, sell your watch and buy yourself freedom." I understand that logic, but I already have freedom. I have my job, my hands, my workshop, my repair of broken watches. This freedom, it's small, quiet, not worth $1 million. But it's mine, and the watch is part of it. It's with me, and will be with me as long as I work. The next day, Emma's first client came to her workshop, a new client. Not mechanical restoration, but expert appraisal. The elderly man brought his mother's old watch, found among her belongings after her death, and wanted to know what it was, where it came from, and what its value was. Emma accepted,
And over the next 5 years, gradually, her work shifted. No longer just restoration, but also historical appraisal. She became an expert on early 20th century watches, European, Russian, and French. In 2028, Emma bought out Henri Mohin's share of the workshop. He was retiring at 71, finally buying a house in Provence, in the small village of Ségur, and planning to move there with his wife, Sylvie. Emma became co-owner of the workshop with Laurent, the eldest of the apprentices, whom she had first trained in the craftsmanship and then accepted as a partner. The workshop, now called Dupont-Juan, moved to the ground floor on Rue de Beaulieu in Geneva's Old Town. It was a small room with large windows and an old wooden workbench, the very same one on which the masters had worked 120 years earlier, and which Henri Mohin had left Emma as a gift. Emma works there every day. Alexandra Feodorovna's watch is stored in a bank vault in Geneva. She takes it out twice a year, on her father's birthday, October 14th, and on her own, March 22nd. She winds it, listens to it tick, then puts it back. Sometimes she wonders what would have happened if she hadn't worn that watch to Solange's wedding that April day. If she hadn't met Dmitry Sokolov on the terrace. If he hadn't known what it looked like. If he hadn't offered to have it examined. The watch would have remained in the shoebox. Emma would have continued working for Mohin for 21 francs 60 an hour. She would have lived in a studio on Rue des Carouges, and she would have no idea what history she'd been carrying with her all these years. It was a moment. One moment. Which could not have happened. But it did. Psychologists studying the phenomenon of accidental revelations, moments when long-hidden information is unexpectedly revealed by an outside observer, note that such moments most often occur not in special circumstances, investigations, expert assessments, but in the most ordinary social situations, at weddings, in lines, in casual conversations. According to a study conducted by the University of Zurich in 2021 on a sample of over 400 cases of family revelations, approximately 58% of them occurred through casual acquaintances, airplane seatmates, people met at parties, new colleagues. Sociologists also note that family stories, preserved across generations, especially after tragedies, wars, emigration, relocations, often contain more than descendants know. Sometimes, entire worlds remain hidden in ordinary objects. Photographs, watches, icons, rings. And only an encounter with someone who can read these objects can reveal what has lain silent for decades. Dear friends, if this story touched you, please share your most memorable moment in the comments. Like the story if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Click the bell to stay up to date with new stories. Take care of yourself and those around you. Until next time.